Olga, you go to Olga. And to Nicholas.
How do you determine what kind of experiments have priority in your life? Because you can do 1,000 experiments.
Of course, a good question. Any experiment that is a focus on love or truth is a good experiment. Mm-hmm. So you always want to do them first. And any experiment associated with God or the human soul is a higher priority than any other experiment. So you want to do them first too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you look at the priority system we talked about last week, it was last week, wasn't it? The priority system, remember we talked about spiritual, emotional, sexual, physical. It makes sense then that the majority of our experiments should begin with the spiritual because they are the highest priority. They are the ones that are going to give us the maximum benefit in the longer term, right? They are the ones that are going to open you to assimilating truth in other areas as well. If you're shut down emotionally, you can't assimilate a truth. So I need to find the truth about my emotions. I need to find out, how do I feel emotions? How do emotions work? What are they like? What do they feel like? I need to find all that out so that I can open up emotionally, so that I can have a faster method of determining what the truth is, right?
And would you also, maybe that's a very intellectual question, but would you really sit down and write down, okay, this is my hypothesis and now I want to experiment and
certainly you can do that. Yeah, certainly. That's better than not doing it at all.
Yeah.
Certainly, but it'd be better, how do I feel about it? How am I going to do this experiment involving my senses? So it's like, you can do something with fun or you can do it tediously, can't you? So what I like, see, an example is, my parents gave me a small rubber ball. I don't know, it's like one of those really bouncy balls. You remember that? And those, you don't see them much around now, but I'm sure they're still made. And you hit it and it just goes for miles. And so I loved it. I bought a big one, a small one. Eventually I ended up having to buy these things for myself. So I bought a big one, a small one, and I bought a number of different types. And I'd experiment with the angles about getting things back to me, So I'd throw a ball like in between, on your seat, and I'd go boom, 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 and come back to me. Back, and I've just learned about, angles and, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, learning about angles playing on a billiard table is more fun than learning about angles sitting down in a school chair, with somebody drawing angles on a board. Make sense? Yeah. And to also have the judgment of the angles in my soul, the thing with the billiard table, you get the feeling of, I just got that in the hole, right? So there's the instant rewards from understanding at a soul level what the angles mean and where you hit a thing and what happens to those angles, right? So there's fun ways of learning something, and then there's terrible ways of learning something, right? So I think I'd want to design the fun ways, but there's fun ways of learning about your emotions, and there's terrible ways. Imagine sitting in a lecture theatre, like many of you have done this with me. You've sat in a lecture theatre for 4 hours and we talked about emotions, and how much fun was that? I'm having fun because I'm sure many of you are. The more you learn about emotions, the more frightened you become. So it's sort of like, that wasn't very much fun. You've got to come up with a way of making it a bit more fun with these experiments to learn the truth, right? So you experiment with rage and see what happens there, and experiment with kindness, and experiment with compassion, and experiment with these feelings in a real life situation. You'll learn far faster than somebody sitting in front of you lecturing to you. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's ways to learn that are fun, there's ways to learn that are quite difficult, and unfortunately on Earth we've chosen the more difficult ways to learn most things. Because we're afraid of making mistakes. So we'd rather sit in front of a person lecturing us about emotions for years on end, which you've done, right, without experimenting with any of my emotions. And so how much more knowledgeable about emotions now are you compared with with somebody who didn't do that? Well, you're not. The reality is you're just as dumb about emotions is where you started, except that you now have a whole intellectual concept of what you think they might be, which is now added to your concepts or your presumptions, which are now those presumptions are now preventing you from actually having more emotion. So it doesn't make any sense to do these things. So you've got to learn to go through the experience, you know. So this is very important when you make experiments. You make them because they're real life experiences. You know, you don't do it just because Jesus said I should make an experiment. So today my whole job is to make an experiment. Well, you know, make an experiment that's going to have an outcome if it succeeds. It's like, it's the difference between going, okay, I'm just going to build I'm a bit worried about all the mathematics involved in building a house and making it square and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'll get a flat piece of thing there and I'll get some matchsticks and they'll be my wood and then I'll glue them all together and I'll make a house and I'll look at the end and go, oh, I learnt some things there. And you might, right? You might do this if you're a child. But when you're an adult, you've got the ability to build an actual house. Why would you not start that and then see what goes wrong? And use that for learning. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And there might be an outcome once you're done.
I personally think I get way too complicated about experiments.
Yeah.
Especially since I started listening about divine truth.
Yeah, that makes no sense to me because I'm not complicated about it. No. So what happens for most people is their fear goes higher. Yeah. They hear some truths, their fear goes higher, they don't deal with their fears, they emotionally shut down their fears. The net result's going to be, I do less rather than more. Yeah, and that's sad if you think about it, because that's not what should happen. What should happen is, once I learn the truth about how to do a thing, I should do more of it. But again, we got to use the word learning here very judiciously. You're only learning through experience and experiments and emotion and senses. When you think you're learning through your intellect, you are not learning. You are not learning. Ideas are coming at you with your intellect, that is true, but you're not learning them. You can only learn them by doing. So this is why I go, I see many of you have great ideas and you never put them into any action. And I go, what's going on there? It's like, you're never going to know whether it's a good idea or not. Right? It's only by putting in something into action that you learn, oh, that made a mistake there, that wasn't very good. But because many of you have these deep emotional impediments about doing something wrong, you're unwilling to do something. So procrastination, which is what many of you are very good at, comes from the fact that you're afraid of making mistakes and you're afraid of the emotions involved when you make one. Right? My feeling is make as many mistakes as you possibly can and learn from them. That's what you want to do. That's what I've done. Yeah. This life as well as the prior one. Like, I didn't have an excavator at my disposal in the first century. It's funny when you get in one and you make mistakes with it. Like, you sort of learn how to use one and where it's best to be used, and also don't overload it when it's extended because you might tip the damn thing over and all sorts of things, right? You learn a lot of practical things about that and things that you didn't know before. Yeah? So this is very good. Everybody should do that. Imagine if we had no emotional impediments to learning and we learnt everything emotionally and sensorily. Can you imagine what school would be like? It'd be awesome, wouldn't it? You'd be getting up in the morning, you're half sick and half dead from the sickness of it. I'm going to school, and they'd have to tie you down and tie you to your bed to stop you from going to school, to stop harming other people potentially. But, you'd be passionate the whole time about wanting to go. And, you'd be soaking up the information, not like, oh, here we go again, running my thing down, Every time I got to a new lesson, particularly English, I hated English. and I go to and they'd say, oh, you had to read Macbeth or something, and I go, do I have to? Now I want to, right? Because I like some Shakespeare now, but back then it was like, oh God. There was no The teachers weren't connected to the material and passionate themselves. They didn't create a way that was for learning that, because everything's about curriculum to a standard, whatever. They haven't created a way to learn that, and that the child will naturally enjoy. And so you're there and you don't enjoy it. And naturally, when you don't enjoy something, you're probably not going to want to do it. Yeah. So how many of you enjoyed school? So what? Maybe 10% of us, maybe 15%, right? You know, I love school, but I know that it's not normal. And I also know that if they made a lot more job, I would have loved it a lot more. So when you design your own experiments and when you design your own life, you want to make sure that if things work out, there's an outcome from them, not just, oh, you did an experiment, there was no outcome, and therefore, you know, it didn't really benefit anybody, you know. You also got to do big. You got to go big is my sort of idea about it as well. Mary knows that. It's like, you know, I wanted to know whether digging some holes on the property, whether they'd fill up with water and they'd retain water if I put some mulch in and everything. So I didn't dig one hole and just watch. I got an excavator and I dug 100 holes. Mary said, why are we digging all these holes? I got to know whether it works, where it works, if it works. You know, I've got to do the experiment properly. No? And that experiment didn't work very well. Many of you know we've got hundreds of holes out of our property. Some of you have fallen in those holes. And you can see that because of the way the matter decays and everything, and the way the water is only concentrated in one little area, it has no bigger benefit to the larger landscape, right? When it came to terracing, it was the same. It's like, we want to do a terrace. I said, there's nowhere on our property I can do a big enough one. So that experiment we had to start at the function centre, because it wasn't and for that experiment we needed an excavator and a dozer. So, okay, hopefully they'll come along, you know, and soon enough somebody bought us an excavator and a dozer and off with that experiment, right? And when I say bought us, I use that term very loosely. It's bought God's way, an excavator and a dozer. And because they could see the plans that I'd made, right? And so, yeah, very first time we get the worst piece of land that we could find on the property, and we did a big terrace. Like, it was like 180, 200 metres long, 35 metres wide. I wanted to see if it worked. It worked. And it only worked because I'd made 5 other failures on our property of all different experiments. I tried digging holes. That doesn't work as good as I wanted it to work. It did work, but not as good as I wanted it to. And then I thought, what I'll do is dig a big trench, like all the way along the whole hill, and fill it up with matter. Like, you see one of them over here, on the top of the hill over here. I dug a trench that was it was a swimming pool sized trench. And I filled it up with matter, like root to the brim, like overfilled it with matter. And then I watched what happened. And then over the years, I'd get in there with a shovel and dig down, and I'd notice, it's wet, and then dry. This isn't very good. Because in order for it to work, I need it all wet, or all moist at least. So so then I realised, of course that makes a lot of logical sense, because there's not enough water falling to get the whole thing wet. Like, duh. So make it not as deep. What happens then? Right? And this is an experiment, another experiment. You just experiment. Once I found the right depth, which ironically is only about, not very deep at all, but also contain that depth so the water could be contained equally over that entire area. Now you get fantastic things happening, right? So that's what's happening at the Environment Centre now. You get trees growing that are now, 6 to 8 metres tall in a couple of years, and all this water stays there, and all this life comes in. And you walk through there now, and it's like a whole ecosystem of birds and animals and everything. This is what I was aiming for, right? But if I look at how much that experiment cost me, probably probably $200,000. That's without the dozer and the excavator.
What I really love about this is that you didn't beat yourself up.
No. Well, I often come home in the mirror and say, I'm a bit sick of failing. You know, like, I tried again and I failed that one, I'm getting a bit sick of it. But then you just go, well, how are you going to learn? Like, so I had to have my cries about failing sometimes. Yeah. Important to understand that with life.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.